Okay. Well, it looks like we have people that were here last week. And I guess we need to go ahead and get started because it's 5 o'clock. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, let me share my screen here. And I need the screens option, screen number 2. Here we go. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen, and it should look more or less like your screen right now. If you have questions, what?
My Unity's being a bit weird. I'm trying to get to open.
Okay. Let me see what I've got on my list of stuff here. Let me know when you get set up. Did anybody else having any issues or problems right now?
Nah, mine's good.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, he left. He's gone.
He might be restarting his computer.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, I got it working. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine. Okay. So, if something happens with the stream, somebody pipe up and tell me. And otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, where we left off last week is we had a top-down view and we had our movement script set up for our simple player, and he had 2 scripts. The movement script, no, we only have 1 script. The movement script is been assigned to him. So if we press play, we can see that using the WASD keys or the arrow keys, we can move our player around, and that's pretty much what we got to, which is good place to be. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is if you are moving your character around in a top-down shooter, typically you want the camera to follow the player, but here it's actually possible for me to run off, so now I can't see myself at all, which is not ideal. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mess with the camera. There is a simple and stupid way to do this, which is I can just drag the camera down in the hierarchy to be a child of the player. Now the camera will follow whatever the player does. If I press play, now my camera is flawlessly following my character. However, we're not going to do that. The reason we're not going to do that is because Unity has a built-in camera editor called Cinemachine that will allow you to have a lot more control over the camera than the default camera component. And we may use it later to do things like transition into cutscenes or to alter the view for specific challenges or levels. So I tend to use the Cinemachine for every game that I make because it's built in and it's great. So I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo this, and if you didn't do that, you don't need to hit Control-Z. But just make sure your main camera is now not parented to your a child of the simple player. Okay. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to make sure that the camera is looking over the player and looking down, and we know that it is because we can look at the transform, right? So the transform from the camera is set the position in the world position 250, 30, 250, and the player is at 250, 1, 250. So the camera is 29 meters above the center of the capsule. So that's cool. So we're going to go create a virtual camera. So we're going to go Cinemachine, which is one of the selections here at the top of the screen, and we're going to do create virtual camera. And you'll see it's called CM-VCam1. Cinemachine can create a lot of different kinds of cameras. We're going to use a standard virtual camera for now, and we're going to disable nearly everything. Well, Cinemachine is really, really powerful, so we're sort of using a Lamborghini to deliver the mail. We don't need to do it this way, but I want you to start getting used to how it works. So let's turn off almost everything Cinemachine does. So we're going to set the transform of the Cinemachine to match the simple player in the our main camera. So we're going to make the X 250, the Y 30, the Z 250, and if we go look at our main camera, you'll see that the camera is now following along with it. The main camera is being influenced by what the virtual camera is doing. So we're going to set the rotation here from 26 to 90. So now we're looking straight down. We're going to set rotation of the X, of the Y and the Z to 0. So now the camera's not turned around. And if I go back to my main camera, you'll see that it is also at 90 and 0 and 0, even though it wasn't just a second ago. If I try to move my main camera right now, it won't move because it's being influenced by the Cinemachine, by the virtual camera. Okay. So now we need to set some settings. So in the body here, you see we've got some issues. These yellow exclamation points mean something that we're expecting hasn't been set yet, and it's going to cause problems in the game. We're going to change that by changing this from transposer to framing transposer. And we're going to come back and deal with this exclamation point just in a second. And then the aim, we're going to change composer to do nothing. So all that should be activated in here is the body. So we want to follow and look at the player. So up here in the virtual camera script, you'll see that it says follow and look at, but there's no transforms associated with it. You don't have to grab the transform component and drag it. You can just drag the game object itself. And Unity knows you mean to look at that game object's transform and to follow that game object's transform. So just drag the simple player into the field that says follow and into the field that says look at. I need to have Discord up so I can see if you guys ask questions. Give me 1 second to make it smaller so it's not in my way. But it looks like no one has asked a question in the chat yet. You can also just, ask questions. Okay. So, and then we're camera distance, we're going to set this camera distance right here to 10. Now remember that we had set the camera 30 meters above the ground, and now it's only 10 meters above the ground. And the reason I'm doing that is to emphasize that the virtual camera overrides the regular camera universally. So now let's take a look at this, and you'll see it now follows my player, but my player is lagging a little bit. You see that the center of the screen isn't quite exactly where the player is. In some cases, you might want that. For our tutorial process right this second, we don't want to have that lag because it's going to mess up our aiming later on in just a few minutes by setting it off by a bit. It's not going to be a terrible offset, but it's going to be a little bit, and it's going to be annoying. So right now, we're going to fix that. We're going to stop hitting play. Because remember, any changes you make in play mode are not saved. And then in the Cinemachine virtual camera, we're going to go to the inspector, go to the body, and the X, Y, and Z damping, we're going to set to 0. And so now when you hit play, it's not going to allow the player to get out of the center of the screen at all, which is what we want. Cool. Okay. We're going to talk about the Cinemachine camera a lot more when we start doing some more interesting camera stuff, but at least now we've got that set up. So does anybody have any questions so far? All right. So now that we've done that, we're going to move on to creating our second script, and this is going to be our aim orientation. Again, there's a lot of value in me making you guys type out the scripts, but there's also a lot of value in saving our time by not doing that during these sessions. So again, I'll send out the scripts in an email this weekend when I put the video up. But I also want to just copy and paste them right now into the body of the chat, which I'll do in just a second. So remember that for a twin stick controller, you have two things. One is which way am I aiming, and the other is which way I'm moving. You can move effectively backwards. You can aim while walking backwards, and you can also aim forward and off to the sides. So we want to control that in a separate controller. One of the things that you'll see if you look at the full game project that I sent you is I did not separate out my scripts. As we're going along, and as I'm working on this each week, I'm making improvements to make the scripts handle only one thing, which is what they should be doing. So this script is only going to handle aiming. So we're going to click Add Component, and we're just going to start typing aim orientation, and click New Script, and Create and Add. This will create a new script called aim orientation, but that script is empty. If I click here, it'll show up in the project folder. It'll highlight where it is, and it's currently in the assets folder. So just like I did with all my others, with my last script, I'm going to drag it up into the My Scripts folder, and then I'm going to open my scripts and double click on aim orientation, and that should bring up Visual Studio. And again, it's got the default libraries included: the Using System Collection, System Collection Generic, and Unity Engine. And it's got the name set correctly for us. It's going to inherit mono behavior correctly for us, and it's going to give us our start and update functions. We are going to delete the start and update functions, and at some point, after I get tired of doing this enough times, I'll show you how we can change that so that it doesn't automatically populate them. And then we're going to copy and paste some bits into the middle in the body here. Let me do something here. Control-V. We don't need these two. All right. And I'm going to go to Discord, and I'm going to paste it into the chat. And that is everything we need. And I'm just double checking to make sure I'm not leaving anything out. So there's a bit more going on here. So I'll give you a second to paste that in. And the bit more is I've included a lot more comments, which I'm going to try and do more conscientiously going forward. Typically, I don't leave myself comments because I know what the thing does most of the time. So what are we doing here? At the beginning of our class, we're going to declare some variables. I'm making them all public, which isn't strictly necessary in this case, but I'm going to anyway. The first one is a character controller, and that says I want to get the character controller associated with this game object. Go back to the game engine real quick. The Simple Player has a character controller component associated with it right here. So it's saying go get that character controller. All right, this is a variable to hold the character controller. In a second, we're going to go get it. Then we have two floats, my mouse horizontal position and my mouse vertical position. They're a little bit... the reason the name is so long is because I want to keep very clear the difference between my player's horizontal and vertical location position and the mouse's horizontal and vertical positions. And then we have a float called my angle that we're going to use to do some geometry in a second. Then private void awake. Okay. Private, again, means it can't be accessed by anyone else, but an awake function shouldn't be accessed by any other script typically anyway. Awake happens as soon as the game starts. It's a little bit different than start, because start happens when the level is loaded. So and the asset is added to the level. You can kind of use them interchangeably, but for players you should use awake rather than start. So I'm going to try to be more conscientious about that going forward. Anyway, as soon as the player is awake, go get my character controller. I mean, the only real negative consequence of this is if you had it in start, it would go get the character controller again when you loaded the next level. So it's very fast. So this game object doesn't have a lot of components. And then we have our update function. And remember that I said back when we started, you don't want to put a lot of stuff in update. And there's not a lot here. There's just a lot of notes explaining what this is. We're going to add some stuff to aim orientation later. So right now, it just says first bit, aim at the cursor. So it's going to set the mouse position to the input mouse position.x minus the screen width divided by 2 and the vertical position equal to blah, 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 blah. What does all that mean? Here's what that means. On a screen, the upper left-hand corner is 0, and the upper right-hand, in the X and Y. The Y gets bigger as it goes down, and the X gets bigger as you go across. It's just like the Cartesian plane, except for instead of making the lower left-hand corner 0, they make the upper left-hand corner 0. So the width of the screen, go back to my script. So my position is that number minus the screen width divided by 2. So the screen width is, 1920. Divided by 2 is 860. And it's saying, I want you to offset my mouse position by half of the screen width. Because if it's to the left of the character, I want to know how many units it is to the left of the character. And if it's to the right, I want to know how many units it is to the right. So the value will be negative if I'm to the left, and it'll be positive if I'm to the right of the center of the screen, which is where the character is. And the same thing vertical. I want if I'm north of the character or above the character on the screen, I want the value to be positive, and if I'm south of the character, I want the value to be negative. So, does anybody have any questions about that? It's neat once you get it, but it can be a little confusing, and I'm not sure I'm explaining it super well. Okay. It may also be that you don't care. For a lot of this, you won't need to care exactly why I'm doing stuff. But you can. So, the next thing is, there's a note here that says public static float atan2 float y float x. Well, what is that doing? All this is doing is explaining what the statement down below is going to be doing. There's a math function we have to include here to find the angle relative to the center of the screen. And the way we're going to do that is by using the atan function, atan2. Atan2 is distinct from atan3 because it takes 2 variables as opposed to 3. And for a given y value and a given x value, it will tell you what the angle is. In other words, what the angle offset is. And remember, we found the x and y values in our horizontal and vertical positions up above in the update previously. So my angle then is going to be negative mathf.atan2 times and then these 2 arguments, my vertical position and my horizontal position. Because remember, it says here the y value and then the x value. Again, you can go back and do the geometry to figure out how to work backwards to get an angle given a y value and an x value on a two coordinate plane. Or you can do what I did and go to the internet and look up, hey, how do I do this in Unity? Which is exactly what I did. I just copied this math from someone else. I did not figure it out. And then it says it gives you the angle in radians. And I want to have it in degrees. So I'm going to multiply the result, which is in radians, by another mathf.rad2dig, which is change radians into degrees. Depending on where you are in your math courses, you may be familiar with radians. You should probably be familiar with radians, all of you. But when we deal with angles in Unity, we deal with them in 2 different ways. And the most convenient is often Euler angles, which are the traditional angles that you're used to thinking about. 90 degrees is at a right angle to whatever I'm talking about. I don't want to get too into the weeds on how rotation works in Unity because it uses a concept called quaternions. And depending on how far you've gotten in calculus, you may not be familiar with that. But you don't need to be in order for this to work. Basically, what we're going to do is say, give me the quaternion in our transform rotation. Give me the quaternion, which is how Unity handles rotation. But give it to me using the rotation of this many degrees in the X, this many degrees in the Y, and this many degrees in the Z. So if I take off this plus 90 degrees here and save this, and again, there's a lot of math happening here. It's not important that you understand how it works. Just there is actually logic behind it, and I'm going to try and talk through the logic of everything rather than just saying, trust me, this works, because then you're not learning anything. All right, so I'm going to come back here to the game and I removed the thing that said plus 90 F after the thing, so it's just going to return the angle. And I'm going to show you why I did that. So I'm going to click maximize on play. Make sure my little spinner widget is gone, meaning the scripts have compiled. And I'm going to press play. Okay. Now, if you see, my character is now going to turn to look at my mouse, except for it's not quite right. And if I move, it'll still try and chase my mouse, except it's off by exactly 90 degrees. That's why that bit was in there. So I'm going to change this back by just hitting Control Z. And again, this is just to add 90 degrees to the rotation because the resulting math is off by 90 degrees. I'm going to click Save, come back to Unity, press play. And now we're starting to get what looks like a top-down twin-stick shooter because we can move in any direction and we can aim in any direction. Okay? So, cool. But there is a kind of a thing I'm not super happy about, which is that we're currently aiming at the actual cursor. And what we probably want to do is to aim at a crosshair or some other interesting graphical thing. So to this end, I have included a graphic that I made in a paint program called GIMP, the GNU's image manipulation program. It's basically an online open source version of Photoshop, and I use it for everything because it's free and online and open source. So anyway, you don't care where it comes from. So let's go to Assets, My Materials, and you'll see a thing in here that says Reticle. That reticle is what I used in the example game that's out on itch that I sent you a link to a couple weeks ago. But we're going to change how we're doing it because I came up with a better method. And we're going to right-click on reticle and click... sorry, not right-click on it. We're going to click on it to highlight it, and then we're going to hit Control-D to duplicate it. And it creates exactly just a copy of it with the number 1 at the end of it. Okay? And then we want to change the texture type of reticle 1, so make sure reticle 1 is highlighted, from sprite to cursor. Neat. In order to use a custom cursor, though, the custom cursor itself needs a short script. So, let's go back to our simple player. Oh, yeah. Here, when you change something in an inspector in the project rather than in the hierarchy, it doesn't apply the changes until you click the button over here that says Apply. If you don't do that and you try to navigate away from it, it will say, do you want me to apply those changes? And I do. So I'm going to click Apply. So we're back to our simple player, and we're going to click Add Component, and we're just going to call this Custom Cursor. And create an ad.
It's not giving me the option to change it to a cursor.
Okay. So
I've been looking here for a second.
When you go to texture type,
I don't have texture type on my screen.
Okay. When you have the reticle selected, do you have a thing that says inspector?
Yeah, I've got inspector open and it's just not there. I've got reticle 1 import settings. That doesn't show up for me. It shows up with shader settings though.
Yeah. Okay. So, oh, hang on. Let me see. There are two reticles. One of them is a material, which is what you have duplicated probably, and one of them is a sprite. So type.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yep. So type reticle into your screen up here and pick the one that looks like a little white cross, and it should say texture type sprite.
Okay, yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Duplicate that and then change the duplicate one, not the original one, to a cursor. Okay?
All right. Yep. Thank you. All right, I'm there.
Go team. Okay. So, sorry. So we go back to simple player, and we're going to create a new script called custom cursor. And again, we're going to put it into our scripts folder. Make sure you're dragging and not copying, and we're going to double click it to open it in Visual Studio. This is a very short script. We're going to get rid of all the body because we don't need to do this, and we only need an await function and a couple of variables. So I will copy and paste those into the chat. Discord. I'm going to make a break here so you can see where the new script starts and paste that. Press enter. And I'm going to also paste it into mine. Okay. So while you're doing that, I'm going to start talking through what these variables are. There's three variables here. One of them is the cursor texture, which is a special kind of texture called a texture 2D. It just means you have to pick a thing that has been set, where the texture type has been set to cursor. Then we have a thing called cursor mode that we're going to look at in just a second. And then we have a vector 2 called hotspot for some reason that is a vector set to vector 2.0 by default. The vector 2.0 is literally just the parenthetical pair of x and y, where x and y are both 0, 0, 0. So this is saying the hotspot initially is going to be 0, 0. In other words, the hotspot is going to be where it normally is. It's not really the center, which we're going to see in just a minute. Okay, so we're going to click save. And we're going to pop back over to Unity. Watch my little widget spin. It's a very small script, so it should be done pretty quickly. Click on the simple player. My player now has a script called custom cursor, and it needs a cursor texture. So I'm going to go reticle 1. And I'm just going to drag that into the cursor texture slot. And for now, let's leave the cursor mode as force software and the hotspot at 0, 0. And you'll see what happens when we do that. So we're going to press play. Okay, slight problem. My character does, in fact, seem to be following my cursor, but there's two problems with this reticle. One, it is way too large. The reason it's so big is because we have a setting in here that's saying use the actual size of the cursor as it was exported from the graphics program that we're using. So we're going to override that so it would just be the size of a cursor and not this. The other thing is, if you look closely at how the thing is tracking, it's not looking, the player is currently looking at the top of my cursor, and here he's definitely looking at the left of my cursor. But if I go to the right, he's looking sort of up at an angle. Oh, he's looking at the top again. And if I go where he's looking straight up, he's looking at the left of my cursor. The reason is because the hotspot of a cursor, if you look at the arrow that you normally use as a cursor, is the upper left-hand corner. So by default, that is where 0, 0 is. So we need to move this so that it's no longer sitting at 0, 0. And we also need to make it not so huge. So, the way we're going to do that is come down here into cursor mode and change it from force software to auto. And that will automatically allow it to use a normal sized cursor. So press play, and it looks a lot better. And in fact, the offset here isn't even nearly as noticeable. You could probably leave this and it would be okay. Sometimes your player might be like, hey, my cursor was right over that guy and I shot him and killed him and nothing happened. But we want to move the hotspot, so let's change the X to 256 and the Y to 256. And that should offset us enough that we're coming really close to looking directly at the center of the cursor all the way around. You can really tell it when you're right next to the model, much easier than you can when it's at a distance. So that's what I use to check. So I think that looks pretty good, and that's what I'm going to use for now. If you notice in the sample game, we did not do this. We didn't have a custom cursor, and this is one of the improvements that I've made. I think it looks a lot better and works a lot better. Okay, so for the next little
What
bit...
did you change that to?
Sorry.
That was the hotspot you changed?
Yes, in Simple Player, in my custom cursor script, I changed the hotspot to X256 and Y256. And what that does is it moves the center of the cursor from the upper left-hand corner over 256 units and down 256 units along the edge of my reticle, that little crosshair. And you can play around with the values, and if you want to make your own cursor, you can make your cursor be whatever you want it to be in a graphics program. And if you want it to be a specific size, bigger than this default cursor size, you can turn this cursor mode to force software, and you can make it as big as you want, even stupidly big. Notice that even stupidly big, the 256 offset seems to be keeping the player pointed directly at the center of it pretty well. See that?
Is that like, is there some kind of default box that's 512?
There's see, I keep reading different things about this. I have played with this a lot of times to make sure that 256 would work and the aim looks good and feels good. But it says the default size of the cursor is 32 by 32. But there's something going on with the cursor that I'm not really sure about. So the answer is, I don't know. But I have been looking into it. I haven't found a definitive answer yet. It looks to me like those values work. You can keep playing around with them to try different values to see if you can make it even sharper and tighter. But the answer is, I don't know. Those values work, and I'm moving on.
All right, sounds good.
Does anybody else have any questions about cursors? Okay. Up to now, all we've done is, or mostly what we've done is programming. We're going to stop doing programming for a little bit here and get into the art. Some people don't care about the art of video games and just want the programming to happen. Tragically, I'm an artist first, and so I do care about the art. And so we're going to introduce our soldier into the game. So, the guy who created this, Polygon Blacksmith, has a bunch of sets out on the Unity Asset Store. And this is one of them. Hang on just a second. Let me go to the... Glad my recording has all my grunting and carrying on. I meant to have this open earlier. Okay, so let's click on this, and I'm going to drag this over into the screen so I can shill for this guy. So, this guy created these low-poly Toon armies called Toon Soldiers Armies, and he's graciously allowed us to use them for this session. I have gotten rid of some of the, at his request, I've pared down the animations and the models and the textures to the extent that I can by default, so that if this is something you're interested in, you could go out and support him because he's being really nice to us. It is $25, but you get quite a lot for it. There's a huge variation in heads, bodies, weapons, legs, and we're going to take advantage of all of that. I have largely reduced the number of weapons that he's allowed us to use, or that he provides in the kit. Rather, he didn't stipulate anything, but I've reduced the number of weapons. I've reduced the number of heads and bodies, and the number of textures. But you can make a huge variety of forces using just this kit, and I think it's pretty well done. I like it a lot. We also are going to use his zombies to represent our zombies, and they're made by the same guy, so they fit together pretty well. Except they're not to scale with each other, but we're going to deal with that in a minute. Anyway, also you'll see up here the Unity Asset Store is having a spring sale right now. Not to be shilling for Unity either, but if you're interested in buying assets to make your game look better, they are selling stuff. And my ability to take advantage of the sale is limited because I have already owned most of these. So it's good stuff out there. If you want to save yourself some time, there are people out there who create stuff for you to plug in directly to your game. But we're making a game from scratch, with the exception of some art from Polygon Blacksmith and a few other things. So I want to go down to Toon Soldiers in my assets folder. I need Discord, and I need this. And I'm going to click on Toon Soldiers Armies. And there's 3 folders in here: animation, models, and sample scene. If you open the sample scene, a bunch of stuff will be broken, so we're not going to do that because I've removed a bunch of things. Animation we're not going to get to until we start the animation bit, and that might be sooner than I think. What we're concerned about right now is the models. And you'll see there's Toon Soldier Armies, and then there's 2 more folders that say Weapons and Materials. The Toon Soldiers Armies model is the modular soldier, and it is all of the pieces of the modular soldier, because I don't have a convenient way to strip those out, or I would have, because this is the whole thing. So drag that, just click on the Toon Soldiers Armies and drag it into the scene. I am going to set it right next to my player. You can put it anywhere you want as long as you can get to it. Remember that if you lose it, you can always double click on it in the hierarchy and the camera will zoom in on it. I want to turn off my camera wire, and I don't know how to do that quickly. That doesn't matter. Okay, so you'll see that we have a character on the screen, and he's white because he doesn't have any textures applied to him, and he's in a T pose. This is a standard animation pose. There are 2 standard animation poses. One is the T pose, and one is the A pose, where your arms are down at an angle like the letter A. And this is a pretty standard default pose for a character that's being animated in Unity. However, at present, he's pure white, and we want to make him look like a soldier. So I'm going to click on this little button, this arrow next to the Toon Soldiers Armies, and expand it. And that will show all my options and this BIP. We're going to get to BIP in just a second. It is the skeleton that allows everything to work. You can build a skeleton for these models in a 3D program like Maya or 3D Studio Max. I use Blender because it's open source and free, a theme you will hear over and over. So I'm going to click everything in here, and I'm going to select body A by left clicking on it. Then I'm going to scroll down to leg C, hold down the shift key, and left click again. So that selects all of the stuff inside the model. Then I'm going to click on materials and undo my selection because I forgot to do this. I'm going to navigate to materials and then uniforms. And I'm going to go to woodlands. And I'm going to come back up here and reselect everything again. Again, I'm going to click on body A and left click on everything. Shift, hold down the shift key, left click. That will select everything. And then I'm just going to drag the woodlands A TSA _M _woodlands A texture into under where it says add component. Don't try and drag it onto the material because it'll get confused and make a mess. Just drag it to under where it says add component and let go. And you will see that our player is now textured. And he's got on a bunch of stuff and a bunch of what looks like hats and a couple of gas masks. And the reason he has all that on is because all of the options are currently selected. All is too many. So instead, I'm going to left click on A, hold down Shift, and left click on C, leg C. And I'm going to uncheck the active flag for all of them. Because we want to use specific bodies and specific heads to start off with. The reason I want to use specific bodies and specific heads to start off with is because one of the things that we're going to implement later on, because we have all these options, is different levels of armor and weaponry. So by default, I want him to start with not very much armor so that I can put more armor on him later. So I'm going to disable everything. Then I'm just going to enable certain pieces. So click on body G and click enable. Click on head A1 and click enable. And we're going to click on legs A and click enable. So this is our soldier, and he has obviously no body armor and no helmet, but we can easily get a helmet if we turn on to say C1. Now he has a helmet. But we're going to leave it off for right now and just leave A1 on so that we can add pickups and power-ups later on in the game. Does everybody understand what we've done so far and why we're doing it? Or does anybody have any questions, I guess, is a better way to ask that. Okay.
How do I make a mask?
A gas mask?
No, the masks, like you did them all.
Oh, click on body A, scroll down to the bottom, and hold down Shift, and then left click on leg C.
All right.
You got it?
Yeah, and then what
Okay, and then uncheck this box after you have them all selected. Uncheck this box so they're all invisible, and then body G, head A1, and legs A should be enabled. So this active flag is tells Unity where something is or is not in the game. We talked about it a little bit last week, and here's where it really comes into the fore.
Yeah, I forgot because it's not marked as like active.
No, yeah, it's just a little tiny box in the corner. Last week I said, remember that you put all the options onto a model, and then you activate and deactivate different ones, which is exactly what we're doing here. That's the great thing about building modular models like this, is that programmatically then it's really easy for me to go in and say, turn this flag off and this flag on, and this flag off and this flag on, which we're going to do later when we get into pickups, which is much, much down the road. Okay, so, however, let's look at our scene, and I'm gonna click on the perspective here to look directly at my player and my soldier. So my simple player is sitting next to my soldier. Remember that simple player is, if I look in the settings here, his height is 2. He's 2 meters tall. So my soldier, by contrast, is like 3 meters tall, 2 3/4 meters tall, which is 8 feet. That's too big. These models were intended to be used in a sort of like a strategy game or something like that, where you would build the scenery to match their height. What we're going to do instead is we're actually going to scale him down so that he's pretty close to being 2 meters tall, so that all of our other assets will fit together with him. So I'm going to do that by clicking on Toon Soldier's Armies, and I'm going to change the scale in the transform component in the inspector of all of X, Y, as X and Y and Z to 0.8. I've done some experimentation to determine that it puts him pretty close to being 2 meters, as we're going to see in just a second. Or you can see right here, it's pretty close to being 2 meters. Remember that Unity, this little widget up in the corner, allows you to look at a perspective view, which is the 3 arrows coming together, or an orthographic view where the 3 arrows are all parallel to each other. So this is not without perspective, basically. And you can see just by looking at it that they're pretty close in height in a non-perspective view. Okay. Has everybody got that far where you've shrunk him down and he's now about the size he should be? Or does anyone have any questions? Okay. In the inspector, let's rename him because calling him Toon Soldiers Armies is confusing. We're going to rename him Soldier _base _01. The reason I'm calling him Soldier Base 01 is because we may introduce some other soldiers later, and he's just our base guy with no equipment. Okay. So let's press play, and okay, I'm getting a fallback error. If you're getting the fallback error, this is something that came up last week. The fallback editor error is saying Unity is trying to create a window that isn't there. I believe the problem is because of this decal manager, which we don't need. So just right click and delete it. Once I did that in my practice package, which is the one I'm working on to stay ahead of this course so that I have stuff to talk to you about every week, that problem seemed to go away. And that's the only one of these things that I've imported that had associated with it that was previously part of another project. So I think that's the problem. But if you get that error, remember that the way to fix it is to go to Layout, change it to anything else, change it to Default, change it to Reset Factory Settings, and then change it back to 2x3. And drag this back down here and shrink this back down and open this back up, press play. Okay. And then that gets rid of the error. It's not an elegant way to get rid of it, but it will work. And once you delete that decal manager, I think that takes care of it. If we see it crop up again, I'll keep working on it, trying to figure out what's causing that. It is not a normal problem in Unity, and the fixes for it that I can find online are not particularly specific because it doesn't come up very often. But boy, it's annoying when it does. Okay, so I'm going to press play here, and I can see my player just disappear off in the distance, and I can run right through him because he's not set as my player yet. He's just a model in the world. To make him be part of the game, I'm going to double click on my soldier here, and I'm going to drag the soldier to make it a child of simple player. Now, there's something interesting to notice here, which is if I press play, that's not really what I want. I don't need him to be off to the side. I need him to be, the player. So the way you fix that is you're going to set his transform positions, X and Z values, to 0. Leave the Y at -1 because the capsule is raised up by 1 because of the way the center of the capsule works. Now if I press play, I'm running along sticking my arms out to the side, but I'm facing the right direction. Everything looks good. Except now I have a capsule and a block that I don't want anymore. To get rid of those, first we're going to click on the cube and just deactivate it by unchecking the box to the left of the title. Then click on Simple Player. Now, I don't want to disable Simple Player because if I do that, my soldier's invisible and none of my scripts are running and I don't have much of a game. Instead, I just want the capsule to not show. And to do that, instead of deactivating the whole player, I'm going to deactivate the mesh renderer. So I'm going to come down to the mesh renderer script and deactivate it by unchecking the box next to the words mesh renderer. All my scripts are still activated, and I still have my transform set correctly. And I'm going to press play, and now I have a soldier in the field, and he's looking where I'm aiming, and he moves the way I tell him to move. What he does not... Go ahead.
Whirlwind punch.
Yeah. Yes. What he's not doing is animating, which is the next bit. So we've been going for about 50 minutes, and I can spend the next bit trying to do animation, or we can stop there for this week. But it may take us about another 45 minutes at least to get through the animation. So I kind of need a vote. Are you guys up for another little chunk, or do you want to wait and do it next week?
Do we have everybody here that's participating?
I really do think so. I've invited some other people, but they have
Because
not
I mean,
shown
the
up.
only point I would bring up is that if we don't have everybody here, it might be easier if animation's going to take a whole 45 minutes in and of itself to just make sure we have everybody here when we do it.
That's a valid point.
But
Does anybody else feel strongly one way or the other? Jay, do you care? Jay, you're currently muted. I can't tell if you're trying to answer me or not. Did he die?
Who knows?
Oh, it shows him idle. He must have gone away from it. That's fine. I'm stuck because. Okay, let's start on the fundamentals of animation, and then we'll go for the next little bit, and I'll see if I can find a natural stopping place with animation, and we may have to. Yeah, let's just talk about the fundamentals. Okay. You may think it's weird to put the player model inside another model. The reason that we do that is because it's just a good practice to keep things separated. We don't want the model that represents the player to be the same as the object that represents the player, because of we want the. How did I put this? We want to make sure that we keep a distinction between those two things. So if for some reason we want to change the model, we don't end up having to mess with all of our scripts. Is really the reason why we make it a child of another object. And a capsule is just convenient because the capsule collider is already shaped like the character controller. In a perfect world, what I would do would be to create a new object and add all these scripts to it and set it to 0, but we're not going to worry about that right now. It's not important. What we are going to worry about is animation. There's nothing in the simple player object that is about animation because the simple player object is effectively invisible, right? So animating the simple player object doesn't get us anything. What we want to animate is the soldier. And again, this is what's great about Unity is that they've got a built-in system for handling this. This built-in system is called Mecanim, M-E-C-A-N-I-M. Mecanim uses a stock model of a skeleton in order to apply animations. So you can take any animation that is rigged to a standard skeleton and you can apply it to any model that has a standard skeleton. And most models and most animations are rigged that way and modeled that way, which is pretty neat. So if I have a running animation that comes default with Unity for free, I can drop it onto any model that has a standard skeleton built into it, and the animation will just work. I don't have to do anything. So let's take a look at what a skeleton is. And the best way to do that is we're going to, instead of looking here at Soldier 1 and going through all of his bones, his pelvis, to his thigh, to his calf, to his foot, to his leg, to his toe, instead of doing that, we're going to look at the actual models rigged in another view. So I'm going to come down to Toon Soldiers. I'm going to click on Toon Soldiers Armies. I'm going to click on Models. I'm going to click on Toon Soldiers Armies. And you'll see at the top in the inspector now, I've got Model, Rig, Animation, and Materials. The animations for this model are in the animation folder, so there's nothing in here to look at. So if I click on Rig, you'll see that the animation type is set to humanoid, the avatar definition is create from model, and there's a little configure button. We're going to come back to this in just a second. If you click on model, there's a thing at the bottom, this little gray bar, and you can drag it up, and it will actually show you the model. And the same controls that work in the scene view. Sorry. The same controls that work in the scene view. You left click and move it around. You can look at the model from all different angles. This is the import settings for the model, and we're going to leave all of these exactly the way they are. We're not changing any of this stuff. In fact, we're not going to change any of the rig either. We are going to go look at the rig, though, so you can see what I'm talking about. So we're going to click on, and then materials. Again, our materials are separate objects that we're not importing the materials. And if you just drag this object into the scene, as you saw earlier, it's just the default material, which is flat white. Okay, so we're going to click on rig, and we're going to go, the animation type is already set to humanoid. There's a couple different types. Legacy is retained because people built games with Unity before the Mecanum system existed, and they don't want you to have to undo all the animations and break every game that was ever made with it. And then generic is for things that don't use a humanoid skeleton. Like if I was going to animate a spider or a snake, I'm going to have to use a custom skeleton because they don't move like people. But most things are humanoids that have animations, so they have thoughtfully included a humanoid animation, which is what this is set up as by default. The avatar definition says to create my avatar to which I'm going to apply the animations, just build it from this model. And the way you build that is going to the configure screen. So I'm going to click configure, and it's going to say, wait. You're leaving the scene view. Do you want to save it? And I'm going to click yes, save. And now we're in a new screen. Okay. In this new screen, you'll see a whole bunch of new information. And the first thing you'll see is that our character in the scene view has these green, weird polygons inside of him. These green, weird polygons are his bones. And they correspond to the ragdoll over on the right. So the head bone here is... Sorry, let me start. The hip bone corresponds to BIP001 pelvis, the transform of it. So this bone here is the hip bone. If I click on it in the scene view, it will show me where it is in the skeleton, in the hierarchy, and will also highlight the bone in the ragdoll. So I can find pretty quickly from any of these views where it is in all three views. So you'll notice that it says characters not in T-pose, and it's complaining about the hands. We zoom in here, look at the hands and see what's going on with them. I don't know. It may just be that the hands are not animated because of the way he set this model up. Let's look at hand, left hand. Yeah. So in the hand bones, it's looking for fingers. And there are no finger bones in this model because he's got fists and he's just going to be holding weapons. So that's what it's complaining about, but it's fine and we can ignore the error. The head bone only maps the neck and the head, but as you see, you can also build bones and it will recognize the left and right eye and the jaw if you want your character to talk. Again, this model doesn't have them built in. We can do some work in Blender to add them, but we're not going to because it's a top-down shooter and you won't need to see anybody talk. But we have everything we need in order to make the animations work because we have our body, our left arm, shoulder, upper arm, lower arm, and hand, and right arm, and our leg, upper leg, lower leg, foot, and toes all defined. So our animations will work just fine with this model. We haven't changed anything here. You can play around in here with muscles and settings. And if you click on muscles and settings, you'll see your character is in a weird sort of curled up pose. The reason he's in curled up pose is because everything is set to be sort of in the middle. If you drag on this open and close, he will open and close his pose. And what it's allowing you to do as an animator, if you're going to animate inside Unity, is seeing how well he moves at extreme ranges. And so you can check to see if there's anything weird if he twists all the way around or anything like that. We're not going to change any of these settings, and these actually aren't settings. This is just a preview. So we're going to click Done. Revert and Apply should still be grayed out. If you've changed anything, they will be lit up They should not be lit up. So instead, just click Done. If it asks you to save changes, say no, because you shouldn't have changed anything. That would just demonstrate what the skeleton is. Okay, so let's go back to our intro scene. And when you change to a different scene and come back to the scene you're working in, it collapses the scene's hierarchy entirely. Just left click on the arrow to expand the hierarchy back out. Okay. So now we're going to explore our player, and we're going to click on Soldier Base, and you'll see it says it's got a couple of only has one component. It has an animator, and that's it. All the other pieces are these models underneath it, but the soldier only has a transform, which every game object has, and an animator component that's built in by default. The animator consists of several parts. One of them is the controller, which is what we're going to talk about in just a second. And we're going to put a simple animation in and then call it. And then we have the avatar. The avatar is automatically set to be the avatar from the model that we imported because of the setting that we had back in when we looked at the model. And it said, configure avatar from this model. Apply root motion is actually something we don't want. And what that does, let's uncheck it. Apply root motion says, in addition to any other inputs altering the speed of the player, I'm also going to physically use physics to execute his movement. So if he takes a step forward and you want him to move at 2 frames a second or 2 meters a second or 8 meters a second or whatever, it will move 8 meters a second, plus it will also move however much physics makes him move when the animation of his walking is applied. So it'll mess everything up, is what I'm trying to say. We're gonna control very tightly how fast things are moving, and we're not going to use root motion to do that. The reason people use it is it can be significantly more realistic looking. But we don't care about that because we're doing a top-down shooter, and to the extent to which our motion is going to be realistic, or is going to matter, it's going to be fine. I promise. Okay, so what we're going to do then is we're going to have to create an animator controller for this soldier. In our assets, you'll see that there's a folder called My Animator Controllers. So let's click on that. And we're going to right click and do Create. And then select Animator Controller. We're going to name this AC underscore player underscore 01. There's already an animator controller in here called AC Player, but don't use it because it's got some settings in it that we're not going to. We're changing the nature of how the animator works from when I did that original animator controller. So now that we've created our animator controller, let's double click it, and you'll see we have a new tab now. This did not change our scene. It just added a new tab next to the scene. The scene's still open. I can still go get to my player. Everything's fine. But I have a new tab here called Animator. This animator is a state machine. And a state machine says I am in a specific distinct state right now or transitioning between two other states. And this state machine is what we're going to use to control our animation. This is the Mecanum system. This is how it works. To start off with, we are going to use just a default animation so that you can see an animation running, and then next time we'll go through the work of all the pieces we need to make him move in a realistic way. So for right now, let's go down to, in our assets folder, let's go down to Toon Soldiers Armies, and instead of going to models, let's go instead now to animation. And we want our player to start with a handgun. So we're going to click on handgun, and we're going to select the handgun combat idle. And this blue box means this is an object. You don't want the object. You just want the animation. So click on the down arrow next to handgun combat idle, and you'll see that next to this, it has a symbol that looks like a play button from an old VCR or from a remote control. This means this is actually the animation. You can press play, and it will play the animation on the model that it imported with. And again, this is the model where everything is turned on because it doesn't know what to turn on and turn off to preview it. If you want to just model on your soldier, you can drag the soldier into the preview screen, and it would say preview it with that. All I did to do that was just drag this in, and you don't have to do this. You don't care. This is just a preview. What you do want to do is left click on this handgun combat idle, and then left click and drag it into the animator. And you'll see that it makes it yellow by default. The yellow state in your animator is your default state, meaning if it doesn't know what else to do, it's going to play this one. So go back to the scene, and if we press play, nothing happens. I can still move around, we don't do anything, but I'm not being animated. The reason I'm not being animated is because my soldier doesn't have that animator controller applied to it yet. So even though I've set up the animator controller correctly, and I can see that again by going to my animator controllers and clicking on AC Player 01, everything's set up correctly, but I now want to put it on my actual soldier. So I'm going to take this animator controller and just drag it into that controller position. Now if I press play, you'll see that he looks like he's aiming a pistol at my target. So we are starting to actually get somewhere on our game. The next thing we need to do, and what we'll pick up next week, is we're going to add in animations to make him move around in a realistic way rather than just sliding along the floor like he's doing now. And we'll start messing around with the weapon component. So that's all I have this week. Does anybody have any questions?
This is getting like really complicated.
Am I going too fast?
No, it's just like my brain is too small for this.
I hope not.
I can't handle. I'm not ready for the future.
I probably shouldn't have gone so much into the detail on the math because once you get it working, you don't care about the scripts for the math. There are a lot of moving pieces to animation, but we're going to do them over and over and over so that you get used to them because you have to do it every time you do an animation. So we're going to create a script to handle our animation for our player. We're going to create a blend tree to blend between different animations depending on what the player is inputting. We're going to update our movement script to provide some information to our animation handler so that we can keep track of what's going on in the game. And you'll start to see why and how scripts need to talk to each other, why things are made public. And then we're going to do that all again when we get to our zombies. But we're also going to continue doing some fun stuff, like adding the actual pistol into the game and start working on how shooting works and the bullets and impacts and stuff. Hopefully you're getting a sense of how this all works and how much work goes into a game. And the whole intent of this is not to throw you in the deep end and say, go figure it out. I'm figuring it all out and giving it to you so that hopefully you can learn from it so that when you want to go write your own game, you can have something to refer to.
Okay.
That's the plan anyway. I don't know how effective I'm being, but I'm trying. And if you get lost, I'm gonna put the video back up on the channel, and you can rewatch it. And I'm always I don't know about you guys, but I'm on lockdown. So if you have any questions, you can always reach out through email. It's probably the best way to reach me. I usually have Discord off unless I'm doing this. But you can reach out and ask me questions if you're confused about something or want me to cover something again or go over something with you. I'm happy to. I just think this stuff is really neat. And once you get your character walking around and shooting and zombies dying, which we're going to have probably done in probably 3 more sessions, you effectively have a full game. And then it's just making it better. So about 3 more weeks of me clicking and dragging stuff and explaining where things are going, then we're going to start. We're really going to start being able to improve the game, and I think that'll be fun. I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I am aware that there's a lot to it. One of the things that I think is insightful about this is it helps you figure out how much stuff there is in video games. One of the things that's also interesting about it, though, is how little there is to video games. once you start realizing that adding another weapon just means dropping another model into the game, then a game that features hundreds or thousands of weapons isn't as impressive as it used to be, because you know what they're changing. And so if we start to get into that stuff, it's like, wait a minute, not much to this at all. We're gonna introduce the handgun to start off with, but I've got plans to introduce a lot of other weapons as we move on, and each of them will have a little bit of a different flavor so that they feel different. But that's really where it's going to start to take off and be a lot of fun to mess around with. But anyway.
Sounds good. I appreciate you putting in the work.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is I was going to make this stuff anyway, and I figured I should share it as long as people were, If you have questions, let me know. Go team. I do enjoy doing this, and I appreciate you guys hanging out for a little bit. I'll put the video up this weekend, and I will... Oh, right, don't forget, most important bit. File saves the scenes, and file save project saves your project. And we'll pick up from this point exactly next week, and we'll... the first thing we'll do is we'll dive into a more interesting animated player, which will require a little bit of doing, but once we get it done, it's very satisfying because you'll know what he's doing and exactly why, and that's where it feels really cool. Okay, thanks guys. I will talk to you next week.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.